Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our episode 10 of It Started at Horizons, JFF's monthly free webinar series that builds from our National Horizon Summit, which took place last year in June 2020. I'm excited to announce that our next Horizon Summit is just around the corner. It's going to take place next month in June 2021. And we will be putting in the chat some additional information regarding our summit. It's free and open to all, and we'll provide information about where you can go to register and attend. So for today's discussion, we'll be talking about how state and local leaders are creating policy conditions for an equitable economic recovery. My name is Erica Cuevas. I'm a senior policy manager at JFF, and I work on our federal and state policy team. Today, I am joined by three state and local leaders who are shaping equity-minded policies in response to the economic downturn and our society's longstanding inequities. Before I get started, I want to encourage folks to also join us online on social media. Here is a list of some accounts and hashtags for you to use and consider. We'll also be on social media, so feel free to tweet at us and tag us as you go. Additionally, I want to note that this is a pre-recorded session. However, we will be with you active in the YouTube chat to answer your questions and to share additional resources as we go along. So please add in your thoughts there and your questions, and we'll be on the lookout for those as we go. I also want to introduce you all to our speakers. We have a rock star panel today. So first we have Zakiya Smith-Ellis, who serves as the Chief Policy Advisor to Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey, where she is responsible for developing and directing the governor's policy initiatives in coordination with the cabinet. Today, Zakiya will talk about and she'll share information about the governor's efforts to help New Jersey residents get their basic needs met and to rebound and advance from the COVID-19 crisis. We also have Jonathan Furr, who is the founder and the executive director of Education Systems Center, which is a mission-driven policy development and program implementation center based within Northern Illinois University's Division of Outreach, Engagement, and Regional Development. Today, Jonathan will share information about Illinois' Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act, equity targets for post-secondary education, as well as transitional instruction, among other things. We also have Karen Suarez, who's the director of Uplift San Bernardino at Making Hope Happen Foundation. She's also the executive committee co-chair of the Inland Economic Growth and Opportunity Initiative. Today, Karen will share information about the initiative, which unites a diverse set of community leaders across California's Riverside, San Bernardino counties to advance a cluster-based approach to inclusive economic development. So I'm really excited to hear more from our panelists here shortly. So before I pass it over to them, I want to provide additional context about JFF, who we are in case this is the first time you're engaging with us. So we are a national nonprofit organization, and we work across the country, and we've been around for over 35 years. It is our vision that we have a society in which economic advancement is attainable for all. And our mission is building a society in which everyone has the resources, the skills, and the tools that they need to achieve economic advancement. And to reach this goal, we drive transformation across our country's workforce and education systems. So that's a little bit about us and JFF. And to further set the context as to why equity really is the center of today's conversation, I want to provide some statistics to you all. So when we began 2020, at that time, the US economy was very strong, but even then, economic mobility was out of reach for millions of Americans. At the beginning of 2020, we know that about 15% of US workers lived below the poverty line. We know that there were about 71 million US workers who did not have an education beyond high school, and about 27 million US adults did not have a high school diploma. And if we think about the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that there's been deeply unequal educational and economic impacts across Americans. So we know that women, young people, Black and Latinx workers, workers without a degree, and workers in low-wage jobs have been hit the hardest. We also know that students from low-income families have been most likely to cancel their college plans altogether. And we know that people in lower incomes have reported having trouble paying their bills or having needed to go to a food bank for additional support. So on JFF's end, it is our vision that in order to move forward towards a recovery, we want to ensure that it's an equitable economic recovery and one that truly works for all individuals. And so we believe that a three-pronged effort is needed to support people, places, and systems. So experience and evidence tells us it takes a concerted effort across these three areas in the following ways. So if we think about helping people rebound and advance, that includes equipping all workers and learners with the knowledge, the tools, and experiences that they need for career entry and advancement. When we think about building inclusive regional economies, that includes investing in quality jobs and broadening access to those jobs, co-designing talent development solutions with employers to address pressing skill demands, and also empowering communities and community members to play a key role in charting the path forward for economic development. It also includes redesigning our educational workforce development systems by scaling and sustaining what works, spurring innovation, dismantling inequitable and outdated structures, and fostering collective action across systems to better serve the skill needs of all workers, learners, businesses, and economies. At JFF, we believe policy is essential in creating the conditions for a recovery that focuses on closing equity gaps rather than reinforcing them. And in particular, we'll be talking about state policy efforts today. And despite, or maybe because of all of the recent federal stimulus efforts, we believe state governments play a key role in adopting and implementing policies that close equity gaps. So a little more background is that earlier this year, JFF released our state policy roadmap for an equitable economic recovery. And this roadmap urges state policymakers to think about the COVID-19 recovery differently. This recovery should be equitable, and our vision is that it ensures systemic transformation, it fosters community revitalization, and provides individuals from all backgrounds with the supports that they need to get into good jobs and to succeed. So we invite policymakers, businesses, and civic leaders and community partners to use our roadmap as a resource to guide their state's recovery efforts from the pandemic-induced downturn. A little bit more about our roadmap is that it includes 4 core principles for policy design. So these are principles that we had in the back of our mind as we were crafting the solutions and the recommendations included throughout the roadmap. And these are also core principles that we encourage state policymakers to have front and center as they're putting together state policy action and solutions as well. So the first one is focused on driving upward mobility by supporting individual social and economic advancement. The second one is focused on closing equity gaps by acknowledging current and historic gaps in access to opportunity. The third one is building on what works and scaling evidence-based strategies while catalyzing innovation. And the fourth one is on integrating and coordinating systems by supporting comprehensive approaches to complex problems. So the integrating and coordinating systems really is about bringing K-12, higher education, workforce development, employers, health and human services, all together to align their systems to best support participants, students, and workers. So a couple of additions in terms of our roadmap. So there's 3 core uses of our roadmap. The first one is to guide short-term actions for recovery, including some ideas on how states can consider using their federal stimulus dollars. It also is a resource to help states set a longer-term vision to build a resilient, diversified, and inclusive economy. And the third purpose is for states to use the roadmap to assess their current policy conditions and to help them chart a path forward for major reforms. To dig in a little bit deeper, so within our roadmap, focus and provide recommendations and solutions across helping people, places, and systems. So for our section focused on helping people rebound and advance, these are 4 topics that we highlight within that section, and we provide state policy recommendations for achieving these actions. So we talk about universal career navigation services, skill building, rapid skill building and credential attainment strategies, innovative financing options for folks to access education and training opportunities, and strengthen financial and social supports to meet individuals' basic needs. The second section is on building inclusive regional economies. So we talk about inclusive approaches to economic development, expanding quality jobs, job generating investments, and here we lean in heavily on infrastructure investments, also regional sector strategies. And then the third core section is about redesigning education and workforce development systems. So we have recommendations here included focused on skills-based education and employment approaches, accelerated and efficient pathways to ensure that students and learners, when they do access education and training, that their pathways are efficient and they're able to get a quality credential and ultimately into a good job. And we talk about solutions for integrating work and learning as well. So throughout our roadmap, we have some key elements. So we provide some background information about why these issues matter. So I just walked you through a variety of topics that we address in the roadmap. We provide additional context on why those areas are critical. We talk about current challenges to addressing those areas. We talk about what's needed. We include state policy recommendations. We highlight some state and local examples. So for folks who want to learn and know more about where are their areas doing these items really well, we provide those examples for you. And we also link to additional resources for those who want to dig even further into the topic areas. And then really quickly, before we turn it over now to our panel, want to also note that within our roadmap, we provide our state policy recommendations into 3 different bucket areas. So we have recommendations that we categorize as foundational policy recommendations. So those focus on planning, table setting, ensuring the proper data and metrics are being collected, that focus on funding and guidelines to practitioners. The second bucket is focused on recommendations that are more advanced. So we're thinking about reforms to current systems, targeting money efficiently, providing technical assistance to practitioners, and scaling best practices. And then our third bucket is on transformational recommendations. So this goes beyond foundational and advanced, and it's about re-envisioned systems, larger scale investments, entirely new different models. And the reason why we group our recommendations across these areas is because we know all states are at different places today in their journey towards an equitable economic recovery. So we want this to be accessible to all states regardless of their starting place, and to be able to find where they're at and then also have a clear path towards the next steps and next solutions that they should be pushing forward. So that's a little bit about our state policy roadmap. In the chat, we'll provide additional information. We'll also include the link to where folks can go to view our roadmap on our webpage so you can learn more. And now we are ready to transition to our session and to hear more from our speakers. So we're going to drill into various facets of the roadmap and to learn about specific policy conditions in 3 states that are driving towards a more equitable economic recovery. So we'll hear from New Jersey and their efforts in helping people rebound in advance. We'll hear about Illinois' efforts to redesign education and workforce development systems. And we'll also hear about California's effort, in particular, a specific region within California, and the work that they're doing to revitalize regional economies. Then we'll all come back together and have a quick discussion to round out our time today. So again, here's our distinguished panel. So we'll start off hearing from Zakiya Smith-Ellis from New Jersey's governor's office. Then we'll go to Jonathan from Education System Center, and then to Karen from Uplift San Bernardino. So I will now pass it to Zakiya to kick us off.
Thank you. And as you outlined, your policy roadmap starts with helping all people rebound and advance. And that's something we've certainly been thinking about. How do we do that in New Jersey? And certainly before COVID, we were really focused on helping people get access to skills that they need to get good jobs. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of those efforts, as well as how they transformed after in the wake of the pandemic. So one thing that I want to start with is our talent master plan. It's called Jobs New Jersey. In February of 2020, we rolled this out, thinking that it was going to launch a series of events and initiatives about how do we help people really get those skills, how do we build talent in the Garden State. And so that really was a comprehensive strategy that included a holistic effort from across the whole of government. The master plan was developed by the Governor's Jobs and Economic Opportunity Council, which I co-chair. At the time that we were developing this, I was the Secretary of Higher Education, and I did this with my colleagues, the Commissioner of Labor, the CEO of the Economic Development Authority, and we outlined some strategic priorities that were about expanding access to opportunities by increasing educational attainment, training individuals for jobs that were in demand by connecting education and training programs across industry needs, and then matching that talent to jobs by ensuring access to up-to-date information. And so those were the three prongs of that talent development strategy. You can go online and find that if you want to look at it more. But of course, then COVID happened, and we were challenged to kind of rethink our strategies and initiatives. And we're currently in the process of doing that and thinking about how to revive this effort. So I think many of the efforts that we talked about and the things that we were talking about doing are even more important now, because many people, when we think about equitable recovery, those folks who are most impacted, we know in terms of job losses, were people of color. In New Jersey, they were Black and Hispanic in particular. And so we are really thinking about what does it mean to get back on the right path. And we think going back to the first principles, which equity was a part of this talent master plan, is a way to do that. I'll quickly just go through a couple of other things. Some of these were mentioned in the talent plan. So one is the Community College Opportunity Grant, which is our state's version of free community college. It's focused on those who are earning $65,000 or less in family income. So really focused on those students who are most in need. And then also the governor has proposed to extend that same kind of promise of free tuition to students attending our four-year colleges and universities, so that no matter whether you choose to attend a community college or a four-year college, that if you are low and moderate income in New Jersey, that you would be able to go tuition and fee free. We know that's not the totality of the need, but we recognize that that's a huge burden that many students face, is the tuition. So we see that as a way to expand opportunity, and think of, again, these are things that when we saw some of the statistics that you shared, low income students being scared away from college, being concerned about that, we think it's even more important to show that we have affordable pathways. The next thing that I'll mention that was also a part of that talent master plan is you can't just help students get into college, you have to support them while they're there. And so we had launched something called the Opportunity Meets Innovation Challenge, which is support for college completion. And that is something that, again, we had started talking about it pre-COVID, and we actually have funded it post-COVID. So we're now supporting colleges with some of our federal funds to meet their needs for providing wraparound supports for college completion, in addition to the free college initiatives. Next, I just want to talk a little bit about a task force that we have called the Future of Work Task Force, which was charged with studying how long-term trends such as technological innovation and advancement, as well as short-term shocks like what happened with COVID-19, impact the development of jobs and our economy. And so we know that building resiliency in the workplace involves responding to the dislocation of workers that comes as a result of some of these issues, and then investing and harnessing the opportunities created by technology rather than kind of being waylaid by some of those things, being strategic about thinking about how to protect workers and give them good supports through that time. So the task force was built by an executive order early on in the governor's term, and is really working toward a set of policy recommendations that would inform our workforce agenda. And again, thinking through what is it like for our workers in the gig economy? How are they impacted, and what kind of supports can we provide to help them have a smooth transition to whatever it is that the next phase of work looks like in future years. And again, COVID has really impressed upon us the need to have strong, not just a strong social safety net, but a strong worker safety net, I would say. And so that's what that task force is really focused on. So it could include things like upskilling. It could include things like training for incumbent workers and help for people who are long-term unemployed. So those are ideas that I know are percolating there. Also within that task force, there's two ideas that I just want to highlight. One is called the Pay It Forward Fund. And this is a budget proposal that would create a public-private funding mechanism with capital that would pay for training programs for individuals that are low income, long or short-term unemployed, or recently incarcerated. And the seed from that state and partners would be recycled through the fund to pay it forward to future trainees to attend training. They would only repay the cost of that training if they reach certain minimum salary thresholds. And we're doing this in a pilot fashion because we know there are some versions of this that kind of are not designed equitably. And they would not, of course, repay anything that is more than the full cost of their training. And they would have, there was like no interest, no fees, et cetera. So it's a way to, in addition to things that we're doing like free community college and the free four-year college initiative that we just launched, this fund is a way to help folks who may have other paid training opportunities but not have the resources to get there to access that training and to pay it forward for future generations. We really are excited about that and know that it's also important to cover not just the cost of the training, but sometimes cost of living. So we're thinking about how do we incorporate that as well. And quickly, because I know we're needing to kind of go on to other folks, we also have a pilot for lifelong learning accounts. This is something that we'll be able to spend up to, if our budget proposal is passed, which is currently being discussed with the legislature now, would be up to $10 million to help people of any age pay for training. So again, it's kind of like we have 529s for kids, sometimes for those people who are able to save. This would be the state funding accounts for training for individuals that they could use throughout their life to go back, whether they've started college and not finished, or not going interested in college, but apprenticeship models or other types of training that are less like certificates or things like that. It's really a more expansive view of how we can help people to really get the kind of skills and training that they may need to advance in their careers. And really, again, all this is about investing in people. And then the next thing that I just want to highlight is, in addition to kind of these accounts and ways that we're talking about investing in people, I think the investing in training itself is really important. And so we've been really focused on that through something called the New Jersey Apprenticeship Network. We've grown the number of registered apprenticeships. We've had a 68% increase. I won't share the specific numbers, but we also have seen a quite significant increase in the number of those apprentices who are women, which is a huge deal because apprenticeships have typically been historically white and male. And so we have started tracking our data on apprenticeships and see that through our efforts, we've been able to expand those again to more women and more people of color in those apprenticeship programs. And then there's just two more things that I want to mention. One is just when we talk about protecting people, it's not just about investing in their training and development, which is extraordinarily important, but also their basic needs. And one thing that we know, more than one thing that we know, but one thing in particular is that people haven't been able to pay their rent, their mortgages during this time. And so we have an eviction moratorium going on across the state where you cannot be evicted for non-payment of rent during the public health emergency during the pandemic. And that's just been really important to protecting people. We're trying to think about what comes on the other side after, God willing, the pandemic is over and we're all fully vaccinated. How do we help people kind of get back on track? But for now, we felt like it was really important to not, in a densely populated state where part of the transmission is kind of being in close quarters with people, not force people into situations that are unsafe, and really help people protect their homes. And then just the last thing is, another thing that we've realized is that it's really important to have protections for workers in their jobs. We heard so much from our labor brothers and sisters that just having an employer that is going to make sure that everyone is masked, that they're sanitizing things correctly, is really important. And, you assume that everyone follows the CDC guidelines, but those aren't mandates. And so we created an executive order that was really focused on protections for workers based on the kinds of things that you would like to see, in collaboration with the Department of Labor and the Department of Health. They can investigate complaints if your workplace isn't kind of adhering to the guidelines. You can have someone come and investigate, and you have a right to not be on that work site. So those kinds of things are really important when we talk about protecting people and not just training them for good jobs, but making sure those jobs are actually good, you have to have some enforcement around that. So that's what we're a little bit of what we're doing in New Jersey, and hopefully it provides good fodder for a future discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Zakia, for sharing all of that information. And it's a lot to dig into. And just want to highlight some of the areas that you called out, which we also call out in our roadmap, and we'll provide some additional resources into the chat. But you had mentioned efforts to provide affordable post-secondary opportunities to individuals. You talked about the need to also focus on college completion, right? So it's not just getting students access to financing, but it's also ensuring that when they are in higher education or education, they have accelerated and smooth pathways ultimately to completion. You talked about registered apprenticeships, innovation. So a lot of things to dig into there, and really appreciate you sharing all that information. So next, I'm going to pass it to Jonathan Furr from Education Systems Center to hear more about Illinois' efforts to transform education and workforce development. So on to you, John.
Thanks, Erica. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and JFF has been such a key partner for so much of the work that I'll be talking about. So I'd first like to start just to be able to introduce you to Education Systems Center, or Ed Systems. So my team of 12 is based in the Outreach Division of Northern Illinois University, and it's reflected in our mission statement. We focus on advancing racial equity and preparing more young people for careers and lives in a global economy. To do that, we work closely with state agencies and also with statewide bodies such as the Illinois P20 Council, and our work focuses in 3 areas that are shown here, including college and career pathways, bridges to post-secondary, which includes both early college credit and avoiding remediation outcomes for students, and data. And those are 3 areas that I'll talk about in the discussion today. Involved with our work, again, in addition to our state level work, we're also engaged directly with a network of communities across the state of Illinois that are directly implementing the policies that I'm discussing. And so this network includes 65% of the state's Black student population in public high schools and 60% of the Latinx student population, which is in alignment with the racial equity goals that we have as an organization. And last, we are also focused on how are we ensuring that the innovative practices that are emerging across our communities are being elevated up to the community level and the state level as well. Much of the foundation for our policy work is focused within the Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act, or the POWER Act. And so this was 2016 legislation that our organization helped to champion through a 4-year development process, kind of working closely with our state's P20 Council. And this act was developed really focused on what are the key barriers for student success as they're transitioning from high school into college and career. And so out of that process, there were 4 areas that were identified. First of all, looking to put in place a new state framework for defining grade level benchmarks for post-secondary and career expectations. Also looking to scale up 12th grade transitional courses, so for seniors in high school, coursework that they can take to be guaranteed placement into college level courses as they move on to the community college system. A new state system for college and career pathway endorsements and high school diplomas, and also a new pilot program for competency-based high school graduation requirements. So my comments today are going to focus mostly on the second and third items, but the first and fourth are still really important critical areas for our state's college and career readiness system. So beyond the POWER Act, where one of the other key frames for our state policy work has been our state's 60 by 25 goal. So in 2009, the Illinois P20 Council adopted a goal to increase the proportion of adults within our state that have high quality credentials and degrees to 60% by the year 2025. And as you can see, according to the Lumina Foundation, we're at 54.4%. And the projections that we have show that we're going to be really close to that goal when we get to 2025. But we also know that this number has not been consistent across our demographic subgroups, with less than 40% of our Black adults and less than 30% of our Latinx adults who are meeting the post-secondary attainment goals that we've established. So in 2018, our state legislature directed the Illinois P20 Council to update the the overall attainment goal that we have to include equity-specific targets. And that's work that my team has been leading with our state's P20 Council. And really since then, with COVID-19 and the growing social movements following killing of Black Americans, we've been even more focused on the equity targets and objectives that we have. And within the next few weeks, our state's going to be adopting those equity targets. We'll be very aggressive to make sure that we're really focusing all of our system components on those goals of ensuring more of our Black and Latinx populations are meeting the equity goals and the targets that we have as a state. And that includes the work that we have on the Post-Secondary Workforce Readiness Act. So I kind of want to shift to talk about how those equity targets are getting infused within this particular piece of legislation and our scaling efforts. So this slide is kind of focused on the work that we've been doing with our transitional coursework, again, to avoid remediation. And the slide is showing the percentage of Illinois high school graduates that are required to take remedial courses in community college. So this is one of those data points where lower is better. We're working toward those lower numbers. And this is really key for as we look at student of color success and progress through post-secondary. Approximately half of Black students within our state who are in college are engaged in college through our community college system. And that number is 70% for the Latinx students who are in college are engaging in our college system through our community college system. And the data is also showing, though, that as those students are transitioning onto college, they have approximately 20% higher remediation rates than the white students within our state. So making sure as we're talking about pathways and post-secondary credentials, if we're not focusing on these remediation barriers, we're not tackling the issues that are really preventing students from making the right progress. So the good news you can see here, our math rates is dropping. And that's through placement policies at the college level and also our state's movement to a multiple measures placement framework, which has now just been codified within state law in the last year. This also relates to this transitional coursework we're engaged in high school. So students and seniors, again, if they're not ready for college, are taking these courses, and successful completion is enabled is allowing those students to place directly into that college level coursework. You can also see, though, from the English standpoint, that data has been stagnant. That's not moving. But our state has just now adopted new policies and frameworks for transitional English, and we're starting to scale those now. So that's going to help those numbers to drop as we're moving ahead past the current pandemic. So to shift to talk more about our work around college and career pathways, this kind of this slide reflects our overall state model for college and career pathway system, which is embedded within the Power Act framework. It's also core of our pathways model for our state's Perkins plan, WIOA plan, and lots of other policies. So when you look at the four key components on the left-hand system, those are how we kind of define the quality elements for a quality career pathway system. And on the right-hand side, we know that as we look at the future economy for a state in different regions, that certain occupations and jobs are going to provide a rewarding and sustainable career, and that those are overwhelmingly going to take some type of post-secondary credential. And our pathway models have to build toward those credentials. And there in the center, you can see our college and career pathway endorsement. That's our new part of the Power Act, is there to be able to recognize students who are at a key milestone with high school graduation that have been addressing those core elements of a quality career pathway. So while we know that a well-designed pathway system should build toward those key jobs, and that research shows when it's implemented well, these models can particularly benefit students of color within our system. We also know that too often our career and technical education systems throughout the state aren't meeting these expectations for quality career pathways, that we've got too many CTE programs that are leading to lower paying jobs and aren't paying a living wage. There's too many programs that aren't broadening access to work-based learning, and also too many that aren't incorporating early college coursework and acceleration toward those goals. So for us to tackle that, we've really been working as a state to see how we can shift low quality CTE programs to pathways to opportunities for students of color and for the rest of our state population. And so we partnered with our state agencies to be able to define and promote and support high quality pathways that are aligned to the Power Act and also leading to those quality growing jobs in Illinois, and to make sure that those are approved as part of our state's Perkins plan. So through that, we've been working to develop a series of model programs of study guides that communities can adopt as they're implementing the Perkins work. These models were developed by starting with the labor market data. So where are jobs going? What are the priority occupations? Bringing that back down into a deep analysis of the credentials and degree sequences within our state that lead to those growing jobs. Identifying from there the strategic dual credit that's part of those degree sequences, and then mapping the competencies that students need to be able to be successful within those progressions. And we're currently working across a number of local partnerships with high schools and community colleges in 4 years and the employer partners to be able to implement these models. In addition to the course sequences, we've also been focusing on defining a continuum of work-based learning experiences, which starts with the basic awareness activities and career exploration in the elementary and middle school grades, extending all the way to the more intensive models for the apprenticeship models as students are moving through that. And so with COVID, we've actually had a strong focus through our center on where there are opportunities to be able to launch a new network around virtual work-based learning that we know can address issues of access as we're moving forward past the current public health crisis. And we're continuing to focus on scaling efforts around these work-based learning systems. So how do all these pieces fit together? I want to provide a quick example from our finance and business services model program of study. I know this is small, you're not able to see this on the screen, but to give you the directional model of where this goes, it kind of starts down in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, again, showing within each of these sectors, what are the occupational areas that are growing and can pay that living wage threshold? And then back mapping that through the post-secondary options that lead to those quality jobs, and then bringing that analysis back down through the high school experience as we think about early college credit and aligned work-based learning. So what does that look like? Starting again with the orientation courses, kind of providing that broad foundation within these course sequences, moving to those skill development courses that are reinforcing those key competencies within this business area, and then moving on to the capstone courses, which are really critical. The financial accounting course is critical to so many of the business pathways. Make sure that that is being highlighted and supported for students to progress through it with the aligned work-based learning experiences that are part of that work. And the guides that we have and that we're supporting to implement are addressing and providing much more detail and supports around all of these different components. So just to be able to close out with my comments today, I want to kind of take a bigger picture focus for this work. And the Power Act, our model programs and study guides have discrete strands and components, but it's really part of a broader policy move to see how are we focusing on the tiers for this pyramid. And it starts with, as we're looking for students, what are the foundational skills that they need for general employability and life readiness across multiple career areas that you can build through activities such as the work-based learning continuum that I talked about. And then within that second tier, providing students the opportunities through pathways and through early college coursework to accelerate to that career area that is of interest to that student. And that you can either affirm that direction while in high school or provide students the ability to adjust as they're making better decisions about moving on to post-secondary. And last, at the top of that tier is making sure students are academically ready in those core areas like English and math, which we know is going to be necessary for all types of post-secondary credentials, whether it's associate's or bachelor's degrees, or the industry credentials that can provide the employment opportunities. And we feel that if we're successful at building this pyramid, particularly for students of color, then we're going to have a shot of being able to address the targets for our post-secondary attainment that I talked about earlier. So thanks very much, and look forward to more discussion later on.
Great. Thank you, John, for providing all of this information, and also want to highlight some key areas that you touched on that we touch on in our roadmap as well. So a lot of key themes about helping smooth pathways for high school students onto post-secondary, thinking about reforming remediation courses and structures to ensure that that doesn't end up being a roadblock for students, expanding high quality pathways and acceleration, work-based learning opportunities to ensure that young people early on do see the relevancy between what they're learning in the classroom to careers and pathways that they want to pursue after school. So appreciate all of the information you've shared, and thank you so much. So next we will pass it to Karen from Uplift San Bernardino to talk about the Inland Economic Growth and Opportunity Initiative. So to you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Erica. We're incredibly grateful for the partnership that we have with JFF and including us to be a part of this conversation today. We know that policies impact us on a personal level, and so I'm just delighted to share how IEGO is using inclusive approaches to economic development. So I am the co-chair of the Inland Economic Growth and Opportunity, known as IEGO, and I'm going to start with our collective priorities. So IEGO's priorities include quality job generation by developing asset-based participatory strategies for generating quality jobs for those with and without college degrees in opportunity sectors that can close historic equity gaps. We're securing investments to advance the region's existing and needed infrastructure so that we can implement cluster-based development strategies. We are focused on bi-county collaboration, as our Inland Empire region is actually 2 counties, San Bernardino and Riverside, and amplifying the key messages of IEGO's mission and values, the mission and values of our partners and strategies through a range of communication tools and policy. So I'll be focused on our bi-county collaboration and policy efforts and provide some examples. Our operating values were really intentional and identified with a diverse group of small business, industry, community-based organizations, students, and community leaders known as our coordinating council. Our values are focused on economic capacity, economic opportunity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, environmental sustainability, data-driven decision-making, innovation, local capacity building, and place-based investment. The study from the Future of Work Commission, a new social compact in 2021, highlighted that while real wages for high-income workers have increased over the past 40 years, median wages have generally stagnated and even slightly declined for low-income workers. There has been growth in both high-wage and low-wage jobs, leading to a hollowing out of the middle class and a declining share of workers receiving health or retirement benefits, which are important sources of economic security and key measures of job quality. For our region, it is imperative to ensure that our existing residents and the future workforce are part of the job opportunities that support our triple bottom line. We're focused on job quality, environmental sustainability, and inclusive growth that creates wealth building opportunities for all Inland Empire residents and businesses. And so how do we do this work? So our clusters for equitable economic development. Brookings defines industry clusters as groups of firms that gain a competitive advantage through local proximity and interdependence. So this cluster-based approach creates a geographical concentration of related companies. And then other organizations in the sector or in the field develop an industry cluster that then generates greater productivity and innovation. So higher wages, more entrepreneurial activity, and developing a single, rather than developing just one single industry sector. So this framework encourages cross-sector efforts. They include our K through 20 space, industry partners, small businesses, community-based organizations, residents, workers, and more. We decided to focus in our region on sustainable logistics as the first industry cluster to pursue, because the high concentration of logistics companies and training programs in our region, knowing that a sustainable logistics cluster does include a lot of overlap with and interconnections with other sectors like advanced manufacturing, cyber security and IT, and green tech, it made sense to get started on those sectors under the logistics umbrella. So basically, cyber, IT, and green technologies are going to be core components of a logistics cluster that you see there in red. And these clusters foster really great intersections between workforce and economic development. So as an example, apprenticeship opportunities, we have our Launch Apprenticeship Network in the Inland Empire that's building new cybersecurity and IT apprenticeship programs. So aligning Launch, or an effort like Launch, which is a workforce strategy, with IEGO, an economic development strategy, allows Launch to get more companies and partners, and we can accelerate and achieve scale faster. So our regional network approaches are important for us to enable support for workers and families and the communities and neighborhoods that we all want to live in, that they want to live in. Our MSA is in a bi-county region, so it's important for us to elevate, connect, and coordinate opportunities at the local and regional levels. We're inviting place-based work in both Riverside and San Bernardino counties to have seats at the table and inform the opportunities for greater alignment. Allows us to strengthen the civic capacity and alignment for bi-county and cross-sectoral collaboration so that we can develop shared goals and carry out shared solutions. And so a little bit about what I do full-time through Uplift San Bernardino. I'm going to talk a little bit why place matters. This is where we see the impact of our policies on our neighborhoods, the opportunities for work, education, access to healthcare, and more, literally in our own backyards. And so Uplift San Bernardino is a collective impact program of the Making Hope Happen Foundation, and we support the mission of the San Bernardino City Unified School District. We have over 30 partners and leaders that we coordinate with, and together we're building a generation of successful adults committed to growing roots in the city of San Bernardino. We're lifting up and building out pathways aligned with careers located in the city of San Bernardino and its surrounding areas so that our local youth are going to be ready for the jobs of today and have the skills needed for success for tomorrow. Our work together helps youth and their families to access and succeed in college, university, technical trade schools, or local and regional training opportunities that will give them the skills and the certifications needed to secure employment and be able to thrive here. We have a small business resource group that's delivering resources and guidance so that they can uplift local entrepreneurs who want to start a business in San Bernardino. And we're supporting efforts to improve housing opportunities for our local residents, whether they're new homes, rehabilitation of aging properties, or additional affordable housing. We're really serving as the bridge between our students and families at the school district level and our community and regional economic and wealth building opportunities. And while San Bernardino is home to top-tier education institutions, we also have among the lowest education and highest poverty levels in the nation. So aligning our collective impact work with our regional efforts like IEGO are important to increase economic growth and opportunities for our residents. Aligning our programs and systems to address the disconnect between the opportunity and the success is going to uplift the people who call San Bernardino home. Our students in career pathways have the greatest opportunity to be on a path directly to quality job opportunities and additional training opportunities. So we believe that involving community experts like our residents and community-based organizations in the decision-making process, then we can close these equity gaps. As a CBO, we can sound the alarm when we're missing the mark. We can obtain resident input about the types of jobs and opportunities like homeownership that communities want. And we can identify barriers within the cluster work so that we can advance and accelerate the creation of quality jobs for those with and without college degrees in the opportunity sectors that we know can close historic equity gaps in our region. So inclusion is what enables us to move forward towards our common agenda, because what we really desire in the Inland Empire is an economy that's going to provide family-sustaining jobs with upward opportunities, enables a high quality of life, and supports shared prosperity for all residents and businesses. And so what Zakiya and Jonathan have both highlighted is really keeping people at the center. So economic prosperity for all, though, it's not possible without inclusion. So at every step of the process, like these are just some activities and events that we had slated for this year. It's important for us to continue to keep our work moving forward and strengthen the connections. Part of the barrier identification includes advocating for public policies. We need to reduce the barriers for economic and racial equity and inclusion, and foster new investments and financial parity for our residents here in the Inland Empire. So we need to advocate for policies that support community participation in regional planning efforts, job quality and high road training, increasing financing for CDFIs and other institutions that provide capital for our underinvested communities, job generating investments, things like broadband policies that unlock and accelerate the development of housing for incomes of all levels, and climate resilience, and so much more. I can't stress enough just the importance of bringing people to the table so that they have an understanding of how these policies are going to impact them. It's leaning into supporting place through investments and being careful not to undermine like local and grassroots efforts, especially in historically disinvested communities and neighborhoods. And as leaders, we also have to create safe spaces for difficult conversations about sustainable development and find the opportunities for that balance of both jobs and community development. So inclusion really is the key, and so is the focus on creating and co-creating solutions for our region. And so I do have a little shameless plug, and I'd like to invite you to learn more about the work and take a deeper dive on how the Inland Empire is transforming the logistics and supply chain industry together here as a region. So appreciate your time.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. And also a lot of key themes that we highlight on our state policy roadmap, and excited to dig in more. And we appreciate our partnership between JFF and your work as well to focus in on places and to bring in community members in regions. It's clear that moving forward, in order to achieve an equitable economic recovery, there does need to be a concerted effort focused on people, places, and systems. And we could have easily taken one webinar each just to really dig into all of the efforts that you're doing in your respective places. So What I want to do now is have a quick discussion and to pull out some key themes related to equity and policymaking at the state level. So what I appreciate about what each of you talked about in your quick presentations is that you focused in on equity, racial equity, the need for inclusion. You highlighted those in your communities who have been hardest hit or those who are struggling the most at this time. So just to build off of that, my first question is, in thinking about an economic recovery and ensuring that it's equitable, what is the why for you, your state, and your organization? So to build off what you've already talked about. So let's start with Zakia, then we'll go to John and Karen. So what is your why for ensuring this recovery is equitable this time?
Sure. And so thank you for that question. Our motto in the state for the governor is stronger and fairer, and we believe that by making you make New Jersey stronger by making it fairer. So as to kind of dispel any notions that by focusing on issues of equity, by focusing on those who've been marginalized, by focusing on communities of color, that in some way you're giving up some other kind of pursuits. It's by kind of creating a $15 minimum wage. It's by having strong labor protections. It's by giving people great access to public schools that we're able to have a stronger economic, system in the state. So I just want to say that off the bat. And I think given that that's our philosophy, when we're coming out of the recovery, it's ingrained in us that we have to, it's imperative. We won't move forward as a state. Like we won't have a sustainable recovery if we don't, even if we didn't want to, right? Like even if we didn't care, like, oh, we just don't care about everybody, it wouldn't work. The math wouldn't work. So I think it's imperative, not only from a moral sense in terms of like, this is our philosophy about how we do business, but it's also imperative just from a dollars and cents perspective. If you really actually want the state to do better in the long term, if you want to see growth, you have to focus on equity, and there's just no way around it. So that's our why.
Yeah, and I would totally echo that. This kid took a point, so I was going to take exactly. So really, there starts with a moral case. We know that the education and workforce systems in our state have really failed students of color since the very start. And as I was looking back and kind of thinking about the presentation today, looking at our state constitution, it talks about that there's the fundamental goal for the people of Illinois, the educational development of all persons through a system of high quality public educational institutions. And we failed to do that. We're not doing that, and we haven't done that historically. But the economics and jobs case is really critical as well. So as we look at the emerging workforce in our K-12 system, it is predominantly students of color. And we also know that the job market in the future is going to require 65%, 70, 75% of people in that workforce to have a post-secondary credential, right? So just as Kate just said, the numbers don't work unless we're focusing on the equity needs for our students who haven't been served by our current systems to be prepared to advance to those pathways to post-secondary credentials so we can support the state's growth beyond the current public health crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I echo those sentiments. I mean, when we talk about California for all, I mean, truly, we're talking about every single person. And I think, as we started the conversation, right, about keeping people at the center, truly, this is about people and making sure that they have opportunities, to good quality jobs. No one comes into this world. I'm first generation. I didn't come into this world thinking that I wanted to be born into a place that didn't offer me opportunities. And so I really think that we do from a moral responsibility, but really just to recognize that, as humanity, we need each other. And in order for us to foster a community and an environment and an economic environment that's prosperous for everyone, it's going to require us to ensure that we are serving our most vulnerable communities, and offering those opportunities to them as well.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. And I'm curious too, if we think about 2020 and 2021 so far, a lot has happened, and we heard a lot already from all of you in terms of key initiatives that have been put forth, additional proposals that have been put on the table. So I'm curious to hear from you all about, over this past year, what has been the most surprising in terms of state policy development or initiatives. And it could be things that are, positive, negative, but just from your perspective over this last year, what really stands out? So I'll kind of put this out to anyone to kind of jump in and provide thoughts.
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to jump in on first on this one. Yeah, I would say one thing that surprised me was that, despite all the challenges of 2020 and, continuing on in 2021, that there was a desire to continue to work on these longer term systems building efforts that we had started before, but to make sure they were accelerated and put in place, even as all the challenges of this last year had to be dealt with and all the crises had to be handled as well. And I'm not really surprised with this, but I've also been encouraged by the alignment around equity and racial equity from the very top, from the governor's office, from our state agencies. It's reflected in the Board of Higher Education's strategic plan draft that was just released a few days ago, to the work we're seeing at the regional community level, where there's that real through line. And that's been really exciting to see that emerge over the course of the past year.
I think for me is like right? The things that we know that can be done in order to ensure this economic prosperity for everyone is that these are not new concepts. I mean, there are frameworks that have been in place that you can read and learn about. These frameworks that were shared in the 90s. And so I think for some of the responsibility that we have as leaders and practitioners is to ensure that we give that memo to future generations, because clearly the work is not done. I was 13 years old when some of these frameworks were adopted. And so how do we continue to accelerate so that it becomes a reality for future generations? And for me, that has been one of the most biggest learnings for me personally, in seeing how we work together in bringing sectors together and through this work that we're doing with IEGO.
And I'll just say that there are a variety of strategies, and sometimes I think being in this place, having worked at a foundation and you go to grad school and your PhD and you think, oh, it's going to be like linear, you're going to get it in this way, and you realize that when you're in the middle of it, in the thick of it, that sometimes most times it's not always how it works. Having said that, that there are a set of, as Karen said, there are things that we know that work. There are things that we bring to this. So the entire policy team, I think, again, the focus, it's not necessarily a strategy, but kind of the principles that we hold dear, the values really that we have, the values of focusing on people. That's the kind of thread that no matter what you're doing, even if you had an intention, so we had this grand plan and this strategy that we were going to roll out the free college tuition for, people at four-year colleges. And then the pandemic happened and our state budget went to, the crapper, and then we had to borrow a whole bunch of money, and it was like, okay, all of these things that we had the strategy to do didn't quite work, but we still have the same values. So what does that mean? When we get the federal funds, which we didn't anticipate having, we can invest them in the same way because we have those values. So I think sometimes it's really just going back to your first principles of like what you're really your first question there, of your why. That's always what can guide you no matter kind of what's going on.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate all these comments. And one thing that came up for me was going back to our core policy design principles that I had mentioned at the very beginning. And one of them is building on what works. I think, like you mentioned, Karen, we already have a lot of great ideas. In many cases, we know what works for people. So how can we scale those efforts more broadly and be intentional in doing so? So I appreciate that. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, one of the reasons why we brought all three of you together is because you are policy makers, policy influencers, and shapers. So you're key leads in your state and in your communities. And so my question is more about policy making, and it is, when you're crafting policy or you're looking to influence policy proposals in your state or in your region, what are the things that you're looking out for? What do you need to know more about or understand more before putting a policy or initiative in place? And from your perspective, what does a good policy look like? So we'll open that to anyone to jump in.
Well, I'll start and say, you know, again, good policy starts with kind of your why and the people and thinking about that as an end result. But I would also say thinking about the implementation. Like I work, my job is work heavily with the cabinet, and a lot of times there's a great idea, and then you know you say, oh, I'm just making this up. You know, we want the Department of Labor to run a huge new, you know, program where we're going to give people, you know, we're going to run this, one of these future of work ideas. We're going to run the lifelong learning accounts through them, and we're going to do it through the unemployment system. Well, newsflash, like our unemployment system is completely overloaded, just like every other state, given the pandemic. So that probably wouldn't be the best like mode, thinking about like the fact that we've got millions of people going through that. So really thinking through the implementation, I think is often just from when I talk to students and their ideas, and you think about kind of how to get it through, that's often where the disconnect is. You've got like this grand plan, but you got to think through the implementation. And if you have the best idea, the best memo, the best pros and cons, the right research, if the implementation is not there, it means that the individuals who we are trying to serve are not being served well. So really good policy, I think, has to think through not just the ideas, but also that kind of practical steps of like, okay, exactly how is the check going to get to the person? Exactly who is providing the training? Exactly how are we certifying that they're providing the training that they're saying that they're providing? You know, all of those little steps down to, okay, and then the individual gets the benefit.
Hmm. Yeah, again, I would totally agree. And just to build on that, so as we look at the state of Illinois, it's a big state, 875 school districts, which I always say is 600 or 700 too many. You know, there's 50 community college regions. And so we're always thinking about like, how do we move those first movers who are wanting to be part of this work through pilots, through the incentive structure, so that we can learn from them and kind of create the frameworks and the exemplar best practices to be able to move the rest of the state based on that knowledge. And so what I talked about in transitional instruction and a lot of the work we've done in pathways, we've used philanthropic funds, we've used state funds to get those first communities to move, to be able to create the peer-to-peer learning through those communities to others, and using those lessons as we built out the broader state policy set. And one of the things that we're trying to do now, as well as we're working with those initial communities, is bringing in more student and practitioner voice to inform the policy as well. And that's one of the areas starting to emerge for us to make sure that that is really part of all the work we're doing, all the way up to the state policy levers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to echo what's already been said, but yes, really hone in on that point of inclusion, because that, policy is incredibly difficult to understand a lot of the legalese language, and how do you translate that to your community while it's in the process? And even the policy making process, like last minute, when meetings are convening and it's going into committee, and how do you make sure that the right people are informed about those things? And so really helping our communities understand about the process, and not so that in the end they don't feel like they have been left behind, but have been intentionally brought in to be a part of that process of making that policy, right? And agree that trying to see it from its inception to implementation is critically important, because how's it going to affect that person? And unfortunately, policy isn't one size fits all for regions. Like, you have to think about the regional impacts it's going to have, and look at it from the regional landscape.
Great, thank you all for sharing. And one thing I love about our policy team here at JFF is that we develop policy solutions that are practitioner informed. So we're connecting back with all of you in states and in communities to hear, okay, what is working, what's not working, ultimately to inform the solutions we put forward. So I just want to say thank you all for those insights that you have provided us. So we just have about a couple minutes left. So one last question for all of you. And it is a call to action question. So as folks have registered, they've been able to submit questions and ask, what they're hoping to get out of today's session. And time again, I was seeing folks were saying, okay, what are actions I can take with me in my state and my community? So my question to you is, what are some actionable steps or some key advice that you want to give viewers to take away from today's webinar to help ensure that they're able to help push forward an equitable economic recovery in their state or their region? So when we think about the audience for today, it could be, broken into two broad groups. So we have also some other policymakers or policy influencers. But then we also probably have a variety of on-the-ground practitioners and advocates as well. So any advice to the viewers about, efforts that they can push forward in their regions?
Some advice that I would provide is that, you don't have to start from scratch. I think that we certainly don't have all the answers from our work, but we do have some strong models for cross systems work. We've learned from other states and other communities. So learn from what's out there, look into those other models that can inform your work and to be able to build from there for your own local context.
I would say don't be scared to engage with policymakers. One thing that I notice sometimes, especially in states, is that there is not always the robust infrastructure of advocacy that we might see at the federal level. So at the federal level, you've got an organization advocating for every, Tom, Dick, and Harry, and not always at the state level, and especially not always advocating on a position where you're thinking about equity first. So if that is you, if that's your positionality, I would encourage you to reach out to your, policymakers in your state and make your priorities known.
I think my message would be is to not be afraid to dive into waters you're not familiar with, because we don't have all the answers. And I'm not an expert in cluster development. I'm not an expert in logistics. I've actually never worked in the industry, but lived experience, personal experiences, and I think curiosity make anyone a wonderful contributor to policymaking and to existing collective work that's happening in the region. So my encouragement is to those of you who may have some doubts about your personal expertise, like, don't be, just dive into the work. There'll be lots of rich rewards from that.
Awesome. I think that's great advice for our viewers, and hopefully more and more individuals will get involved and connect back to their policymakers in their state or their region, and to help advocate for some core solutions, ultimately to achieve an equitable economic recovery. I want to thank all of the viewers for joining today. I hope you found this webinar informative and helpful to you in your work. I also want to put in one last plug for you to join us next month at JFF's Horizon Summit, where it will be free and open to all. So we'll make sure you have additional information on ways in which you can register and get involved. And so that's taking place next month. So thank you all.